I'm just waiting for the second reading of an ordinance.
I think I'm ready to talk about it.
I know. Oh, it might be. It's close.
We'll call the meeting to order.
Yeah.
Welcome everyone to the January 23rd meeting of the Santa Rosa City Council. Ms. Gomez, would you like to
Let
announce
the
the roll,
record show
please?
that all council members are present with the exception of Councilmember Combs.
And Ms. Gallagher, could you report on our closed session today?
Yes, the council met and discussed items 12.1 and 12.2 and gave direction to staff on each of those items.
Thank you. We have no proclamations or presentations. We'll go straight to staff briefings. Mr. McGlynn.
Item 7.1, fire recovery and rebuild update. Before I return over to staff, I have requested that representation be here from Cal OES and FEMA next week to discuss how complaints will be handled on the debris cleanup scenarios in the burned areas. So I just want to say that that is a request that I have placed, and my expectation is that FEMA and Cal OES will outline that procedure in full next week. And now we have task force leads here. There is one issue that we need to follow up on directly, and that's a water quality advisory issue that came out for a very limited area. And I'm going to ask Ben Hornstein, the director of the water department, to update council on where this sits.
Mayor Corsi, council members, city manager noted this is an update on the water quality advisory that the city got it. This is an update on the water quality advisory that the city issued for a small area in the Fountain Grove area on November 10th. That was one of the number of resultant impacts from the fire. We, as you're aware, during the fire, we did have a couple do not drink notices that were issued that were subsequently fairly quickly lifted once confirmation sampling was done. And then following the fire, post-fire, we did our routine sampling that we typically do. And we had a taste and odor complaint on November 8th. In follow-up to that by staff to that complaint, when we observed the sample as well, we sampled it for the full suite of analysis and found some volatile organic compounds that we normally don't find. In fact, as far back as we looked, we did not find that. And benzene is the dominant chemical in that, which you know is a petroleum hydrocarbon chemical. Immediate action was taken successfully to isolate the area, and I have some slides showing the area from the rest of the city water supply. So as we sit today, in that area there are 13 remaining homes. So those are the homes under the advisory. The whole area is, but it's mostly impacting these 13 homes. This is an area, a broad look, and then a deeper look is this detail. And you may be wondering, and the answer is we have posted all this information and more on our website, and we have instructions at the end of the presentation how customers can find the additional information if they'd like. When we issued this advisory, we went door to door and spoke to most of the residents of the 13 homes, also put door tags that we've updated during the intervening time period. And we also did our typical social media and online releases when this went out to ensure that those 13 properties were fully aware of this information. Specifically in the benzene, which is a contaminant of concern, some water samples in that contained area did exceed the California Division of Drinking Water's limit for that specific compound, which is 1 part per billion. As a note, that is more stringent, just for information, than the national, which is 5 parts per billion, both relatively low numbers. We do want to ensure everyone understands, there was 1 sample out of the advisory area early on that did initially have an elevated level of benzene, and once we flushed it and did a confirmation sample, and all subsequent samples have been non-detect. So staff has a high degree of confidence in the area of containment and that it has not spread. We're doing hundreds of samples to ensure that confidence in the greater city does not need to be concerned about this issue as we work through it. The MCL, which is the limit, is the highest level of contamination based on a whole range of suite of chemicals in the water, which is 1 part per billion. Benzene, as you may know, is a volatile organic chemical. It is formed through natural processes such as forest fires, so not that anyone was ever expecting something like this, but the linkage does seem to be there. It's also found in the manufacturing, of course, crude oil and gasoline, but then all synthetic compounds, plastic, rubber, and the like, can have benzene in it, given those are petroleum products. And some of what we're finding is leading us to believe there may have been some damage to piping or appurtenances in the system, such as meters, that is releasing is an active source in terms of the contamination, not necessarily just what we had thought early on, that it had gotten into the system during the fires, and once we were able to flush it out, it would be resolved. And I'll get a little more into what our plans are given that. There certainly is interest on health risk, and based on the current levels, there's no immediate risk for short-term exposure. And again, that's based on all the samples we're taking, extensive data, and of course, continuous conversations with our regulators, water quality regulators, as well as experts that we have contracted to help us with this issue. There's also minimal risk for long-term exposure, and there's kind of a definition from EPA on benzene as it relates to MCLs. MCLs are generally developed for a 70-year life in average consumption, so the primary risk at this point would be short-term acute issues such as skin irritation and the like. And there's no indications at the current levels that these 13 homes are exposed to that that's a concern. We have, based on today's sampling results over the last number of days, we are updating the health recommendations in coordination, and those are being posted, and we'll share what those are. So we had informed residents that they shouldn't consume the tap water, including cooking, drinking, of course, brushing teeth. In addition, the updates that we're putting out now include limits on shower time and cold water washing and the like, and where those new advisories are coming to play. And we have gotten very recently some much higher numbers that I'll share that we hadn't been getting. So we're updating the information really out of a abundance of caution, because the 13 homes are not exposed to these higher numbers. Initially, when we found this, again, we notified customers immediately, isolated the area, notified the regulator, and developed an action plan in coordination with staff, the regulators, and national experts that we've brought on board to help with this. The samples specifically range from non-detect to the highest of a little over 900 parts per billion, right? So that 900 parts compares to the 1 part per billion limit. So it's certainly an issue that has our full attention and concern, and we do feel fortunate that we've been able to isolate this and have that immediate coordination with the affected customers. The vast majority of samples are below the limit, the 1 part per billion, but there are a few locations above it with the highest number I noted. So we're continuing our investigation, extensive sampling throughout the area. We continue to sample and flush and sample and flush. We're testing the soil around the high areas to understand. There is some literature indicating you could have migration from a contaminated soil pipe through the pipe, potentially more so after an event like we went through where the pipe, plastic pipe particularly, could be compromised. So we're isolating areas, replacing service lines, retesting, flushing, retesting, a very detailed, regimented program to try and understand this issue, testing pipes, services, and meters. We have regular face-to-face interaction with customers, updating door tags. We're also, given the impact on the customers, we're providing bottled drinking water and adjusting the water bills of these 13 homes. In terms of next steps to restore water quality, which of course we're committed to do and we will do, it just may take a bit more time than we originally envisioned. We're going to continue to flush, clean, and replace, and of course monitor the system. Continue to sample water lines at existing homes and replace services, frequent modeling. The next steps, at this point it seems possible, if not likely, that we may have to do a wholesale replacement of the majority of the infrastructure in that area. And that will take some time. It'll be a fairly significant capital project. So this event could be going on months. And assuming that occurs, we'll be coming back, continuous updates, of course, to the BPU as well as the council, and maintaining up-to-date information on our website and to all the affected customers. And this is the contact information if folks would like more information on this. Take any questions if you have them.
Thank you, Mr. Hornstein. A couple of questions. You mentioned the literature about this kind of problem. So it sounds like this may not be a unique situation, but it is a whodunit, it sounds like.
Most of the literature that's been somewhat helpful has been around areas where you have plastic pipes you put in areas you may not have known you had historical contamination, and there's migration from the contaminated hydrocarbon, like an old underground storage tank that could leach through plastic piping. Unfortunately, we have found, as well as our experts, very little information in terms of kind of post-fire impacts like this. So we're, to some extent, unfortunately, kind of carving new ground, understanding this very complicated issue, but it looks like we're probably headed to pretty significant infrastructure replacement to deal with it.
This is a pretty large area. Are the 13 homes that you refer to, are they the only homes left standing in that area?
Yes, they are, Mayor. There's approximately 350 residential sites, and outside the 13, the rest were burned by the fire.
And all 13 of these homes are occupied?
To my understanding, yes.
Okay. And if infrastructure replacement was required, that would be to 350 homes?
Yeah, it would be to the full 350 homes, including the mains in that area. We've roughed it out, roughly about a $20 million capital project. But again, it would just take some time as well as a significant cost for us. And unfortunately, but it is what it is, that wouldn't be the prime area we'd replace. It's one of our newer areas for sewer mains, but that's more likely than not the path we're on.
Okay. Council, questions? I do have one card. Dwayne DeWitt.
Hello, thank you. My name's Dwayne DeWitt. I'm from Roseland. I told the gentleman that I probably wouldn't speak on this item, but I think it's important because over in Roseland, we've been facing hydrogenated volatile organic compounds as a pollutant in our underground water aquifer for a number of years. And I realize this is sad news for you to hear about this situation up there, but I do hope you'll take it serious and look into it and make sure that you'll deal with the infrastructure. The way the contamination spread into the underground aquifer in Roseland was the sanitary sewer system developed a leak, and it wasn't dealt with by the county for longer than it should have been, and that allowed it to spread. Now the whole underground aquifer out there is a commingled, polluted aquifer. So whatever you can do to resolve this as soon as possible, it is very serious. Thank you for your time.
Mr. Hornstein, can you clarify that the municipal water in Roseland is not affected by what was just mentioned here?
Yes, as I understand the issue that was just mentioned, that is private drinking water wells, that is not unusual to have a legacy of contamination, unfortunate, but it's not city water, and it's not the water that's being provided. In fact, we've worked with the water agency and we've done extensive sampling on our source water, and the data indicates very clearly that is not the issue. It's really the issue of somehow the burned areas in this specific area brought in some contamination.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. McGlynn, is that all you have on item 7.1 tonight?
That's all tonight.
All right. Do you have a city manager's report?
Nothing to report.
Ms. Gallagher?
Nothing to report.
Okay. Any statements of abstention tonight? Move on to mayor's and council's reports. Who wants to start? Okay.
Thank you, Mayor. Last week, the Sonoma County Waste Management Agency met, and the agency unanimously voted last week to move forward with a draft model polystyrene ban ordinance, styrofoam, and some other things as well. We will be coming back to the various councils for input and comment. This will be an ongoing project. There are a lot of people to bring into the conversation, the industry, the retailers, you name it, and it's people everywhere in our city are touched one way or another, probably by polystyrene. So we will be coming back. I will be coming back to you for your input on the draft model ordinance when that preliminary work has been completed. But it is it's exciting that the agency is taking it on, because it's something that we have become very used to using and receiving in our homes, and retailers are very used to using it as well. So this will be a challenge, but luckily we have the advantage that we are not the only city in the state. In fact, there are numerous cities in the state that have gone down this road, so we will be able to be advantaged by their experience and avoid some of the mistakes made by the communities who went before us. So I will be bringing back the information as it unfolds.
Great. Thank you. Mr. Oliveris, anything?
Sure, just very briefly, a couple of events. Absolutely the wow factor in Courthouse Square this weekend with the women's rally, and thank you for some of my colleagues who did attend as well. It was just an amazing place to be, and see that square just packed full of people coming out and supporting women from all over the world. So that was wonderful. And of course, all of you probably speaking to as well, the celebration of the Rosa annexation, very well attended as well, and overdue, but we got it done. So it's exciting times.
Great. Okay. All right. And thanks for mentioning both of those fun-filled Saturday, exciting events in Santa Rosa. I just have one announcement tonight, be it making an appointment to the Community Advisory Board. Danny Chaparro will be my appointment from the southwest Santa Rosa area. With that, we'll go on to item 10.2, and this is a request for a future agenda item regarding development within the areas affected by the fires. This was brought forward by Vice Mayor Rogers.
All right, well, thank you, Council. I think I don't need to go too in-depth on this, as we've had some conversations. We have heard from staff that it might be up to 6 months to a year before we have a full understanding of some of how the fire happened, what could have been done differently in terms of building regulations to prevent this sort of tragedy from happening. And I think it is time for us to at least have a conversation with the community about that, and about how, in particular, we are going to handle building new homes within the fire area, and whether how we are going to do that until we actually have that report from the fire marshal. I want to be really clear, the intent is not to halt all housing development, and it's not to relitigate Fountain Grove. But I think that we do the community a disservice and developers a disservice if they are moving full force forward on a project, and then we come back a year from now with new regulations that we want to implement, and we do the community a disservice if we're not able to implement that on the housing that's coming. So what I'm looking for is it doesn't need to be a full report item from staff, just a conversation with the public about what other places do, what could we do differently, or how are we going to handle this for the 6 months to a year until we have that report from the fire marshal. And I do understand that the Planning Commission has received a little bit more information than the council has in regards to how homes fared during the fire that were subject to certain regulations versus others. And I think it'd be really instructive for the council to hear that information as well.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. The last part of what you said is I think pretty specific and could be useful to us to get some information from the fire department, building department about the difference in current code compared to past code, and how buildings under those different codes fared during the fires. That is something specific that I think we could and should ask for, but I'm not sure about kind of the extent beyond that, because the subject of building after the fires is broad and wide. I know that there's probably some information available, but a lot probably isn't. So to help staff, I'd like to try and narrow this down a little bit.
All right, so specifically that information, a little bit of information as a presentation about if developers are moving forward and pulling their permits now, and we come back down the road with new regulations that need to be put in place, how does that actually affect the development that we've already at that point allowed to move forward? For example, we've had numerous projects come before the Planning Commission. Are they locked in now with the regulations that they have at the time? And if we come back 6 months to a year from now and ask them to add individual things, are we capable of doing that as a council? And I think, it could be that this report comes back from the fire marshal and says there was nothing new that we could have done to prevent the tragedy that happened, but I think we still need to allow the public to weigh in on if they think that things are sufficient and what they would like to see as well.
Mr. Tibbetts.
Thank you, Mayor. I definitely want to hear this going forward. I think it's important that we answer these questions. I think there's a lot of questions that the public has that only a presentation like this could answer. I have to agree with Vice Mayor Rogers that I think it would be nice to hear what the anticipated code updates are going to look like. From there, we can make decisions about, does that have time implications or cost implications for rebuilding? And we'll have to be really, I think, delicate about those issues. But just having a broad understanding has got to be helpful for us.
Mr. Oliveris.
Thank you, Mayor. Important information, I believe, that needs to come to us at some point. I'm not sure about timing and staff ability to provide things that we don't know yet, because I think some of this stuff is still evolving. I would think that maybe an appropriate place for this would be part of our regular fire update recovery process, or at best, at this time, maybe a quick staff briefing just to give us some information, because I don't believe, and maybe I'm wrong, that we have all the answers yet, and maybe it's a little bit premature, but at some point, I think it's part of the national progression of our recovery efforts. We will have to have this conversation. The community will need to be informed. But I wonder if we have all that information available to provide yet, or if we still have more research to do before we're ready to do that. And I would leave that to the city manager to opine on.
Again, right now, I'm looking for clear direction, and we'll do our best. We'll provide what information we have, if that's what council would like to do. I'm just looking for some clear. Again, you know, I think to venture a little bit in this, I don't think there's going to be clarity, even if there was more information shared at a planning commission. I think it's probably a very early response to maybe what we're looking at, but it was just relayed here. Early responses can become more complicated as we learn different things. And so if council is looking for a general, what the mayor said, sort of building code where we would be, where we are, what anticipation, that seems to be a really discrete conversation. But to speculate about what we know and don't know, I'd have to talk to staff, and I think that's still still an ongoing process. But again, you know, looking for direction. I think if council is really going to be on the build rebuild conversation, that is part of, you know, a focused pathway in goals that comes out of goal setting this week. I think that's going to be a naturally part of that conversation. So again, looking to do that. I mean, I think as this came up first time, I thought it was clearly about whether or not you wanted to, you know, again, is there a difference between rebuild and build? I don't know what, I'm still struggling with what we're trying to do. I kind of understand the mayor's, but I'm actually a little bit struggling what the question is. If it's about a code comparison, we can figure out how quickly we can get that in front of council. That's a little easier exercise than sort of, and you know, an ongoing investigation and where that is. I mean, that's a little more open-ended.
So maybe I can provide a little bit of clarity, because it's not about the investigation per se. What I'm actually looking for is that we've got about a 6-month to year-long gap before we have the information that we're really going to need to have to make an informed long-term decision about these rebuild or about building new in that area. What I'm looking for is a conversation from the council about what direction are we going to go during that time, or how do we handle that? Do we allow it to continue to move at the process that it was going before the fire, or do we have a conversation about additional safety measures that we want to put in place in the meantime? Again, what I don't want to happen is for us to go full force forward for the next 6 months to a year and then come back with a litany of things that are being recommended that would make it safer, that we then don't have the ability to actually implement if that needs to be the case.
I'd like to ask a question of the city attorney at this point, and kind of what options are available to us here. A lot of development decisions aren't even reviewed by the council at this point. Do we have the ability to put additional requirements on development beyond code developments? Do we have the ability to halt development in the burn area until more information is available sometime in the future?
Yes, you would have both of those options. You could consider a moratorium on new development within the burn areas. Would be one option. If you wanted to consider new regulations, and let me back up, a moratorium would come straight, a proposal for a moratorium would come straight to the council, and the council could make that decision. The other option that you mentioned would be to place some additional, perhaps interim regulations or permanent regulations on new development within the burn areas. And that you could consider as well, to the extent that those are zoning regulations. It is likely that they would need to go first to the Planning Commission for recommendation and then to your council. But either of those options could be available. A moratorium would be less burdensome in terms of staff developing new regulations. If we want to place interim regulations on new development within the burn area, that will take substantial staff consideration of what the options are, what might be appropriate, and it will be difficult to evaluate that with until we get further into the investigation and have some solid ground for those regulations. But yes, either of those options could be available.
All right. And Mr. Rogers, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but are either one of those the type of conversation you're looking for here?
What in particular I'm looking at is there a way for us to structure this where we will allow development to move forward, but with an understanding or a necessity that once we have that conversation, if we put in place additional regulations, that the development that we did allow to move forward would then still be subject to it, even if they've already pulled their permits?
In general, you cannot add new regulatory requirements after a permit has been issued. That being said, there are some very limited circumstances. For example, in the cannabis regulations, we have required that if you get a permit, if you got a permit under the interim regulations, any new operational requirements would have to be complied with. So it's more the operational side, but once a permit has been issued for a project, in terms of building code requirements, in terms of zoning requirements, in general, you're not going to be able to apply those retroactively.
Mr. Tibbetts.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to try to offer something for Vice Mayor Rogers. I think what we have here fundamentally is a Vice Mayor, Mr. City Manager, who's asking you for information to help make better informed decisions as these permitting decisions come forward in the future. I would venture to guess that Mr. Moon could walk down right now and satisfy a lot of the questions that may exist up here on this body. But I think specifically the questions that we should be asking are, how has code changed since 1994 when Fountain Grove was built? It's my understanding that in 2005 we saw major changes, and I've heard anecdotally from the building community that the buildings that actually had, for example, the smaller vent screens, higher composites in the walls, actually fared much better as a result of that 2005 code change. And then also just a quick update on what's coming. It's also my understanding in 2019 or 2020 there's going to be robust changes to the fire code. I think if we get those questions answered, speaking for myself, I don't know about you, Vice Mayor Rogers, I would certainly have information to make good decisions about development in Fountain Grove.
And I do agree. I think that that information is extremely important. What I'm trying to figure out an answer for is, how do we allow development to keep moving forward without the answers? And I understand that staff's not going to be able to give us the answers for another 6 months to a year. That's a long time for people to push through projects that might not, at the end of this, be deemed sufficient based on what we're seeing. So I'm looking for something in the interim, some conversation from the council about how we're going to handle that. That information is extremely helpful. And again, as I said, it might come back a year from now where the fire marshal says our code was sufficient and nothing was going to prevent this from happening, and then it's a moot point. But what I'd hate to see happen is for us to approve a bunch of developments that then we find after the fact are not sufficient. So trying to find a way to fill that gap is what I'm looking for. That information is certainly helpful, but it doesn't quite get us all the way there.
Any other questions at this point, Council? Mr. Schwedhelm.
Kind of a combination of questions and just some comments. Because I know there are a lot of these conversations are occurring with the build, rebuild, and a concern that I have from a staff perspective, we just had 2 days of council goal setting, and this topic was not top of the tier one. I know we're having our final conversation on Thursday, but if we do go with these efforts of things in it's real a wild card when we use language such as additional safety measures. There are no guarantees, in my opinion. You know, I don't know what absolutely would have prevented anything, and I'm not sure asking staff to present us information so we know absolutely this would have stopped everything versus a little bit more risky here. Because if we're asking staff to do some of this, that means they're not doing what we talked about Thursday and Friday and what we're going to prioritize this coming Thursday. And with building being, especially housing, being a priority, because my concern that I would have, as I mentioned previous meetings, in the Coffee Park area, you would, I guess, could make some arguments that is a burn area, but there's new building going right there. So this is not rebuilding, this is new building. And for us to even entertain the thought of slowing it down or stopping it, I just don't think that's in the best interest of this community right now. So this whole timing to be able to get the information that we need, if it's something, you know, staff has a capacity of things that have already been shared with the Planning Commission or information that our fire department can update us that's readily available so we have more information if these do come before us. But to initiate some new efforts, I don't think the staff has a capacity, and I think we need to continue forward with what we were already addressing during what we've considered our Saturday problems before the fires. Continue that path as people get, and I think our staff understands, planning understands what many of those issues are. And also hearing our Planning and Economic Development directors talking about having an all-hands meeting for developers. This is what we're looking at doing. And I know our staff has heard what the folks up here have been saying about, so I don't think it's being done in a vacuum. Publican has had many of these meetings at Planning Commission meetings, and these meetings give us some more of that feedback if that's what you're looking at hearing. But I think the path has been set. We need to continue moving forward. So I'm really struggling. I totally get wanting to have more information, do it as safe as possible. But if it's going to add another level of bureaucracy for some of the developments, I'm not sure if that's the best use of our time right now.
Okay, unless there are other questions right now, I've got some cards from the public who want to weigh in on this. Dwayne DeWitt will be followed by Peter Cherneff.
Thank you, sir. Dwayne DeWitt, safety first. That's the most important thing that I think any of you could be involved with. So the Design Review Board recently had before it a 49-bed assisted living care facility being put into the burn area at Fountain Grove. Actually, there'll be more people because they have a memory care unit that will go with it. The Design Review Board heard testimony stating that people did not think it was safe to put it there and that they, in their purview, could talk about safety. When you look at the minutes of the meeting, because they're not action minutes, it doesn't state that anyone questioned safety. It just says opposed the project. So one of the things that happens with people when they face fire is they panic. And people in assisted living facilities need to have people to get them out of the fire safely. Many healthcare workers are trained in fire safety and evacuation. Unfortunately, during this last fire that happened, some places in Fountain Grove that one would think would be the safe spot for your loved ones to be had problems. I'm fortunate that I had no one there, but I know people who did. And the dilemma that we face right now is code, as you will refer euphemistically all the time, is based on what is here right now today. So there's a bum's rush going on by the developers to make sure they can get anything in as quick as they can before things may change up. I believe you don't have to look at it from the business perspective or from the priority perspective of your meetings that you recently held over at the hotel here. I believe it's health, safety, and welfare of the community that comes first and foremost all the time. And this is a reasonable request on the part of Vice Mayor Mr. Rogers, and I believe you should just basically understand that what the city attorney has told you is you have the right to say, because we are in an emergency status, that you can hold things back a little bit. You can say, no, we want safety guaranteed in some of these facilities. You would want your loved ones to be safe in an assisted living facility. That's new development. That's new human habitation. It's not putting a rebuild on a foundation or a site that was already permitted. So I think, you know, you can quibble all day long about it in some senses, but this is really pretty basic. You don't even know where the train is going right now. So saying, well, it's okay for the train to keep going full speed ahead is not a smart situation. This is better for you to take a moment and say, look, we got time. It's the rainy season. We can get things going. And those people who have money, they'll get their projects. Thank you for your time.
Peter Chernoff. He'll be followed by Terry Shore.
Well, good afternoon. So I'm looking at 10.2.1, request for agenda items regarding development. So I'm going to push one more time with a lot more enthusiasm and support from Luther Burbank that you add on to this discussion the strong reasonings for people to consider utilizing living cactus fences. They are firewalls. They are erosion controls. They're food source, flower source, frost resistant, and drought resistant. They are a wall of water. They are totally drought resistant, no irrigation needed. I don't know how many problems that solves. It solves like quite a few things from my view, from my point of view. So you have all these good reasons to use them, and Luther Burbank was a champion of this, and so I would love to see that implemented. I've seen more cactus fences come into being over the last few years just by people putting them up, and it's also a wonderful food source, like I said. So, number 2. Yeah, there was an old movie. I don't know if anybody saw this old movie. It's called The Day the Earth Stood Still. And at one point, the alien lasered a couple of buildings to demonstrate the power that they had so that they can attain peace. And we all remember Ronald Reagan's Star Wars, which, of course, the concept, what they were saying didn't make sense, but we just got done seeing some Star Wars lasers laser our area. And more than a few people saw these lasers, including people that I know. And so it's got to be difficult, no matter what position we're in, to be forced to go forward in a situation while we're not standing on granite. I understand that people have been ordered to not speak about this. It's considered national security. Well, it doesn't mean that to me. Agenda 21 and their lasers, StopTheCrime.net and quite a few other places are very clear on what's happening. And they might not have all the answers, but it's much closer to the truth than I've seen. I mean, how do you explain Kmart? A metal and steel building burned to the ground. I went over there and tried. I threw 50 matches. I couldn't get it to start, but the lasers do that just like that. So I want to ask you also to address the 5,000 homes and the fact that I'm told that out-of-state workers have been guaranteed this work as opposed to local workers. So I hope that you look into these things, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Terry Shore, followed by Bob Hanson.
It's good evening, Mayor Corsi, council members, member of the public and staff. My name is Terry Shore. I'm with Greenbelt Alliance based here in Santa Rosa. First, I want to say I was very excited today to hear on KQED Forum the planning director, David Guin, and Press Democrat reporter and the leader of Coffee Park Strong on the radio talking about what the community is doing in the rebuild. You know, the world is watching what we're doing, and it was very exciting to hear them on the radio and to assert Santa Rosa's ongoing commitment to smart city-centered growth going forward. I'm here today to support the agenda item for future agenda to talk about particularly new development in the burn areas, because we haven't had the conversation. And I think a lot of us were kind of taken off guard by a couple of projects, particularly the one that Mr. DeWitt mentioned, as a model of the type of thing that we need to talk about. And I don't think anyone's saying stop development, don't do development. I think we need to have a conversation. We haven't had it yet. There are a lot of things that we can do and maybe we should be doing. And what can we do? And I don't think we've all been together in the room, the developers, the city council members, the staffers, and the council, the planning commission, to talk about it. We really need to think about fire risk and mitigation, particularly for vulnerable communities like seniors. And there were a few things on this list I got this morning from the county. They're talking about various fire hazard mitigation projects for grants, and I don't know if you're in that process as well, but you could potentially get funding for some of these things, such as garage door backup system retrofit, vulnerable population, rural notification evacuation, generator hazard mitigation placement. So there's some real stuff that maybe we could get done before it's required if we get in the same room and talk. So I'd like to see it as a working session, if it's possible, to have at your as a 3 o'clock work session, so we can just get it out on the table and talk about it. I'd love to also request a work session on the new Resilient City Code that was just posted, that will be going to the Design Review Board February 1st and the Planning Commission the 8th. It's a pretty big ordinance and could be really great, but it's really hard to get your mind around, and perhaps that could be folded into the same kind of a work study session. There are experts out there who could bring some of their ideas. Like just last night, there was a Healdsburg architect at an event I was speaking at who said he's already building more fire-resistant homes. And he showed us the schematics. Other people are bringing forth materials that are available right now, and I understand from the planning director they would love to consider all of these things. So let's get together and try and do it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bob Hanson, followed by Ann Seeley.
Good evening, everybody. Bob Hanson, vet, retired lead carpenter, 40 years. In my circle of friends, I have 3 families that were sitting there waiting for the fires to cool with a crew of friends, family, and neighbors to get them framed up, closed in before the rains. With the intervention of FEMA, EPA, that cleanup was halted until the rains came in. Now any toxins are in our water table. But to a family who just went through losing their family home, how can you stop them from rebuilding their home on their property, rebuilding their home to code, not adding any square footage, not changing the home, building back to what they had, but building it to the codes that are existing now? What authority do you have to tell these homeowners? You can't do it until we get these investigative reports in. Because this was 2,800 homes, that doesn't give you the authority to stop a homeowner, a family, from rebuilding their family homes. 3 families in my circle of friends, ready to start framing up and closing in before the rains, are still sitting there, unable to build on their property. I watched our mayor, Mr. Corsi, first 2 days of the fire, front row addressing the public, 5th row. On the 5th day of the fire, he was in the 5th row with a look on his face like, who are all these people around me? There's a lot of people making a lot of money on 2,800 families losing their homes. Now we're talking about 6 months, 8 months until you allow them to rebuild their family homes on their property. I don't agree. Let these families get back into the homes. Build to existing codes. If you want to add footage, if you want to change your layout, then apply for a permit for that. But if you want to build your home back to where you had it pre-fire, I don't see how you can stop me. Thank you.
Ann Seeley.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Ann Seeley speaking for Concerned Citizens for Santa Rosa. When I read of this, or when I heard the request at the last meeting, I took it to be a request for clarification, which I'm surprised all of you don't want. There are questions of just simply rebuilding on a personally owned property versus new development. And I have heard confusion among you about what is this categorically? Is this new development? Is this just rebuilding on an established property? There are a lot of people who will put a lot of money toward planning development or redevelopment in the coming year. I think it would be an excellent thing to have this discussion about what are your parameters for action versus advisory things that you could do. So please do have this item on the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. And just for clarification, I think that it is clear that we're talking about new development in the burn areas, not rebuilding of burned properties. That's why I'm saying it. Council, are there further questions at this point? Mr. Rogers, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate that this is not about stopping housing production. It's not about relitigating Fountain Grove. It's not about preventing people from rebuilding the homes that they've lost. It is strictly an acknowledgement that we can't wait a year to address the elephant in the room on new development, and that has to go with safety and how we are going to continue to move through that process in the absence of some of the information that many of us have been looking for. It's a chance for the public to weigh in. It's a chance for us to get a little bit more information. That's all I'm looking for.
Mr. Tibbetts.
Yeah, one final comment I want to make before we vote is that what I see is when we, especially a few meetings ago when we had to make that zoning decision, that there were rightfully questions about new development in the area. And as a city that has stated multiple times that we are going to build housing for people, and we all know we need it now more than ever, the reason why I'd like to move this forward is because I'm afraid that if we don't have this conversation, it's going to be more difficult to build the housing that people need unless those questions get answered.
Mr. Sweathelm.
Thank you. It's more of a question for the city manager because, again, the information, I'd love to have all this information. I'm not really clear on what the impact with what we're looking at going forward would have on staff, because it comes down to, if we do this, what aren't we going to be able to do? I'll put it in perspective. At a meeting last night with Coffee Strong, they're in the permits, and if it's going to delay any of those who are trying to rebuild, I need to put it into context. What would this effort have on our existing progress in our rebuild efforts?
So again, again, we're getting the information tonight. You have a goal setting, a final part of that goal setting conversation on Thursday. I cannot answer, part of the reason this process is here is I cannot answer that question right here, right now. If I get a clear assignment, then we can figure out, working with the mayor, exactly how to meet that goal. I would be advising that you go through your goal setting conversation, figure out if there is a place in this conversation. I do think there are two different conversations going on right now. I'm not, what I want to make it abundantly clear is that this is the open-ended question. We're not standing in the way of you having a question and answer. What I can't guarantee is we'll have all the answers to that Q&A. We may have some information, but again, I would ask council to go complete your goal-setting conversation, and this is a topic which you can visit on Thursday, is to have that conversation, have a conversation about how you're going to prioritize things, and this could be fitting in, it could be seen as an addition. I would just urge that this conversation, because I cannot answer this question right now because I don't know what the scope of work is that you're anticipating from staff. We're coming back, as was requested, to think more about things that we can defer. I think we're going to maybe propose a plan of action that divides the year into 2 segments so that we can start to attack some immediate issues that was brought up. Mandates, what are the sort of mandates that we have? So we're proposing that to you. It may fit into that conversation. I can't speculate right now because, again, I'm not sure what the assignment is. If the assignment is a conversation council wants to have about the knowns, we can bring forward what we know, and then council can make some decisions. How that impacts the work plan, I haven't seen the work plan finalized, so I can't comment on the impact to the work plan, or if this is the priority. So I mean, again, I would advise that because you seem to be wanting some of those answers, if we can get through Thursday and see where it is on Thursday, you still can take you still have the power to direct on Thursday. So that would be my advice, is to get to Thursday and figure out how this fits into the Thursday conversation.
Mr. Sawyer.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, I would agree with that direction. One of the things that we have been charged with in the past is being inconsistent and unpredictable in our planning department. And I know that we are making great strides in changing that dynamic and that paradigm. And I have, very much in favor of people availing themselves to all sorts of possibilities as far as building materials, et cetera, that may be on the market sooner or currently on the market. But many of them may be voluntary opportunities. New building is going to have to adhere to current fire codes, and having something hanging out there, an unknown hanging out there, flies in the face of consistency and predictability, and I would be uncomfortable saying to people, well, we're going to issue this permit, but there's this unknown requirement that we don't know what it is, we don't know how expensive it's going to be, we don't know how much time it's going to take to implement. Could it make your home more fire resistant? Clearly not fireproof, I would think, but fire resistant, yes, it may, and could actually make your building, whether it be commercial or residential, even more valuable. Are we going to force you to do? This council member would have a hard time forcing people to an unknown. So I look forward to the conversation during our goal setting. I'm not sure where that conversation may lead, but I am not in favor of having people have unknowns hanging out there wondering what their responsibilities are going to be and how much it's going to cost, because that seems unfair, inconsistent, and unpredictable.
Mr. Oliveros.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't believe that we've asked questions or raised issues that haven't been already contemplated by staff, and I do believe that perhaps this Thursday is the appropriate time to have the discussion. It's right around the corner. Let's do that. If we have to come back to this, we come back to it, but I think it's worthy of having a discussion about this on Thursday.
So I seconded this item 2 weeks ago because I do have serious concerns about approving new development in areas that burned without any acknowledgement or reference to the fire. I think that I just don't think that makes any sense on any level. But I'm not to the point where I'm willing to support discussion of a moratorium, and I know that's not what you're proposing. But what is being proposed is kind of open-ended, and it leaves staff in a position where I think it's unfair to ask them to be prepared to answer an open-ended bunch of questions about things that answers are not really available right now. So I don't think we need to do this at the goal setting necessarily, because I think that there are things that we can talk about now. I would like to have a discussion about code. From what I understand, there was a good discussion at the design review board about that through the fire marshal. I think that information is available. I'd like to have a discussion, and maybe these are the same discussions, maybe they're separate discussions, but about mitigation measures, because I don't think it's just the county that's talking about this. The city is involved in that too. And that doesn't mean that we can't fully flesh out further discussions down the road, but I would like to ask the Vice Mayor to narrow the request for now, and we can talk about refining it further for later on at some future date.
Yeah, I'm fine with that so long as it is, and I assume if it's on the agenda, it will be, that there's the ability for the public to also be a part of the conversation.
Always. So, does Mr. Rogers need to amend his request at this point, or do we just need to focus?
So again, so for example, on code, there will be conversations about code coming forward to the council, because those are going to be essential to the build and rebuild effort. What I'm trying to assess is when you need to have the conversation, what's the prioritization of that conversation? And again, mitigation efforts are part of an ongoing conversation that we're going to have with the council. But if those things need to happen in the next 2 to 4 weeks, there's obviously an impact to how we rearrange our schedule. So this is why it's open-ended. I'm not sure what the instruction is, but it could. I believe there's a community of interest out there that wants to have a moratorium. If you all just want to have a conversation with the community, that's why I don't know sort of where this conversation is leading. I would recommend go through your goal setting, even if this isn't a discrete, see where you feel comfortable in that goal setting conversation. And you may even come back to this at a future date. Is the request, that's why I started, the request is to sort of look at code structures. We can figure out how to have that conversation. I just don't know what the question is or what the assignment to staff is.
Quite frankly, Mr. City Manager, 3 weeks ago I tried to put this conversation on when we were talking about a new development that came before us, and ran into problems where this council ended up not really having clear direction on what we wanted to do. What I'm trying to do is provide some certainty to developers by allowing us to have that conversation about how we are going to approach this until we have those answers.
But again, you don't have to convince me. You have to get your colleagues to agree that this is a foundational conversation on what the specific instruction is. That we're waiting for a specific instruction, happy to entertain it and happy to schedule it. I just need to understand that that's what the body wants to have, and how we're going to prioritize that conversation.
Right. We have that same project coming back to us soon, with nothing being different because we've had this 3-week delay in trying to put this on. I get that.
I understand your concern, but this isn't. You need to get your colleagues to agree that that's the elevated conversation that needs to happen right now. Staff will reorient its work pattern to that, but I can't just work for each individual council member's concern. That's why we're in this conversation.
You've made that clear. I get that. The mayor's motion is acceptable.
Okay. The request, I'm sorry, Ms. Seeley.
I want you to pretend that my comments hadn't ended.
Ms. Seeley, please.
Because a very important point has been brought up.
Please.
Discussing this before in your goal setting session when the public's at work, not present, is not as good.
You know the procedures here better than any of us do. You've been here. Okay, thank you. So the request is for a future agenda item, and my suggestion is that it be specific to code issues. Is that acceptable?
I don't know that that's so open-ended. I don't know if staff would know what to do with that item. If it's to review the current fire codes that are being required for all new building that are coming out of Sacramento, having a conversation about that, I have no problem with that. I think it'd be good for the community to know in this forum what those fire codes are if they haven't already availed themselves to the information online or some other way. But is it what we're thinking they may be in the future? I'm not clear.
No, let's do this. A item that is an information item to update us on where our codes are now. In particular, I mentioned that there was the planning commissioner, I guess it was design review, that received some level of information from staff about how the housing fared based on the level of regulation that they had when they were built, essentially. A conversation about that then allows the public also to be a part of talking about how we're going to do development. We don't need to make decisions on new regulations then. We don't need to discuss new regulations then. But there's, as I said, there's this elephant in the room about if we are approving new units prior to having that conversation without having discussed it at all, what that looks like, I think we're doing a disservice. So if we limited it, sounds like there's concern, let's limit it to a overview of what the regulations are now and how things seem to have fared in the burn area based on when they were built.
So what,
Mr. Olivers.
What I'm hearing is that this could be as easy as a staff briefing on this issue.
Yeah, as an information item, that's fine.
Okay.
But like I said, so long as the public has the opportunity to weigh in as well.
Well, yeah,
with their
they would be
comments.
able to comment on a staff briefing, yes.
Does everybody understand? Okay, your votes, please. And that has 6 ayes. Thank you. Move on to the, sorry? Consent, item 12.1.
Item, sorry about that, 12.1. Ordinance adoption. Ordinance of the Council of the City of Santa Rosa pre-zoning the NIB properties located at 3747 and 3753 Shanate Road, also identified as assessor parcels numbers 173-260-007 and 173-260-008, respectively, to the R-1-6 Single Family Residential Zoning District, file number ANX 17-004.
Council, any questions on this item? I don't have any cards. Mr. Rogers.
I'll move item 12.1 of the consent calendar.
Your votes? And that has 6 ayes. Thank you. Ms. Gomez, do we have cards for public comment? Thank you. This is the public comment for items not on tonight's agenda. Mr. DeWitt. He'll be followed by Peter Cherneff.
I'm going to use the overhead projector.
Hello, my name is Dwayne DeWitt. Today, the Sonoma County Board of Supervisors had an item talking about the Sonoma County Watershed Collaborative, which came together October 16th, right after the fires had happened. And basically what they're talking about is ways to have a better approach to prepare for these types of situations in the future. And they also, on today's agenda there, were talking about the hazard mitigation issues and this amount of money, $180 million, perhaps available for areas affected, that's us, And what's really of importance, I believe, is that down here, one of the things talked about is the shelter retrofit of veterans halls and the fairgrounds. And that means to protect people, for people to have a spot to be in emergency situations. I'd like you to be supportive of that. It's especially important now as we have even more homeless people as we've had in the past. This is a map of creek trails in southwest Santa Rosa. People are living along creeks, and that's been happening for a while. The fire exacerbated their difficulties and made it even harder. So many people have come over into Roseland, and what I wanted to talk about is how you can get some extra money. You folks need to look for money, obviously. Got serious budget problems. They're going to get worsen. And it's not from anything that I have said. It's the nature of what's going to occur. The dilemma is here now with us. So I'm showing you Roseland Creek and the trail. It's been planned for over 20 years. And this map here is from when properties were bought right up here 7 years ago on the south side of Roseland Creek. And it shows that the creek runs through that property, and the bicycle pedestrian master plan also showed that would be a bikeway. And that's a way to get alternative transportation money from the transportation funds at the federal and state levels. Unfortunately, it's just been languishing. We don't have the political power, if you will, out there in the Southwest that the people in the Southeast, have been able to pull together to get your attention for the Southeast Greenway. But I'm telling you, if you look at ways you can link this in with the Southeast Greenway, there's even more money available. You got MTC money to have a Roseland-specific plan, and it was barely mentioned. Now is the time to say, during this emergency, let's look for every penny we can out there, and the federal transportation monies are the biggest pot of money. So alternative transportation and stormwater. That is also another big thing. Non-source point pollution, stormwater. So think of those things. Keep them in mind. OPM, other people's money. That's what developers think about. That's what you can think about. And we'll have a great time. Thank you so much.
Peter Cherneff, followed by Max Crone.
Oh, thank you, Mayor. A couple of thoughts. First of all, a lot of people are taking the position that the cause of the fires is unknown. If this is true, then why are subordinates of Shirley Zane and other supervisors follow me around at large meetings for the express purpose of denouncing anything I say after I've left the group of people I talk to or share on paper, telling persons that I am mentally troubled and asking for many to return the flyers to these subordinates? If the fires are unknown, why would they do that? Here's an idea. Cannabis. Let's let everybody grow 15 plants this spring, and 10 plants goes into the kitty for the fire relief fund. How's that sound? That sounds pretty good, and we can all have a good time doing it. Regarding investigators, where are the investigators? Who are the investigators? How many investigators? And will this be a public investigation? I strongly suggest and request that there be at least 3 or 4, and at least half of them be out of this area without any ties or consequences. All right, here be a question for any thinker like you. When does a military assault become classified as a coup? These federal impositions, like some local politicians, have been increasing in power. Power stolen from our liberty. Rosebud, rosebud, come now to flower. For whenever a politician tells us to relax regarding benzene in the water, to be ingested by all thirsty animals and people, yes, every son and daughter, health risks abound in all food, in all water and food. And all the while, again, they're raising the price of this oily crude. For the sky be indeed falling via chemicalized chemtrails, as white vans are picking up FEMA camp-bound homeless to railroad cars being handcuffed at the rails. Federal intervention, no matter the reason, validated constitutionally as no less than treason. The night of the fires, many witnessed blue lasers, exactly as described in Ronald Reagan's Star Wars, weaponized satellites with precisely such phasers. StopTheCrime.net, California best informational site, definitely shining a light. Are some local officials hiding both the facts and concerns about Agenda 21 lasers that rock and metal burns? The corrupted world has long sought to heist. The answer to corruption's cancer being the power and authority of Almighty Christ. Thank you.
Thank you. Max Crone, followed by Alex Crone. Alex.
Thank you. My name is Alex Crone. I was born and raised in Santa Rosa, and I've spent the past 5 years here practicing as a licensed physical therapist. I am here to express my concern over the 72 small cell phone towers that have been approved and are currently being installed around town, throughout neighborhoods, and in densely populated areas. I am concerned about something far more important than the aesthetic qualities of these small but powerful cell phone towers. There have been thousands of peer-reviewed scientific studies that demonstrate the harmful biological effects that the high-frequency microwave radiation emitted by these cells and other wireless technology produces. Over and over again, this form of microwave radiation has been shown to cause cancer, DNA damage, neurological harm, immune system suppression, and reproductive problems, among many other diverse health effects. Just do a simple Google search on scholarly articles related to the effects of EMFs. The FCC, Federal Communications Commission, is the federal government agency responsible for regulating interstate communications, and they have been given the privilege of being the sole entity that is in charge of nationally protecting the public in regards to this issue. Unfortunately, the FCC is completely dominated by the wireless industry. It is really a joke. Listen to this. The current chairman of the FCC is the former associate counsel for Verizon, where he was in charge of handling their regulatory conflicts. The former FCC chairman, Tom Weiler, was the CEO of the Cellular Telecommunications and Internet Association, the main trade group for the U.S. wireless telecommunications industry, and the lead lobbyist for the wireless industry before being named chairman of the FCC in 2013. There is obviously a huge conflict of interest as the FCC has become a revolving door for wireless companies to dominate their influence. This is the definition of the foxes watching the hen house when it comes to public safety and microwave radiation. This is a great example of why state and local governments need to be able to protect themselves. The FCC bases their safety standards only on the thermal effects of microwave radiation. This is whether it burns you or not. These standards are outdated and meaningless, as it is the non-thermal effects of microwave radiation that causes the harm. At the very fundamental level, every biological process and metabolic reaction is electric. Let's be logical. How can it not have an effect? These microwaves pass right through our body just as they will the walls of the homes they are placed next to. The FCC safety standards are in place simply to allow companies to profit from the proliferation of wireless technology. The International Agency for Research on Cancer and the World Health Organization have classified wireless radiation as a Class 2B carcinogen. The California Health Department recently released a warning to the public that suggests microwave frequency energy from cell phones, Wi-Fi, smart meters, and cell towers may indeed cause cancer, tumors, lower sperm count, less mobile sperm, as well as headaches and effects on learning, memory, hearing, behavior, and sleep. The California Health Department has given advice and steps on how to reduce possibly harmful exposure. Now you are allowing I have 20-plus scientific studies around the world on the effects of living near cell phone towers. I would appreciate if you guys would look at this before moving forward.
You can give that to the clerk.
Okay.
Thank you. Ricardo Oliveira, followed by Danielle Kagan.
Hello, good afternoon. This is my first time being here, and we're hearing all those different things you guys are talking about today. Really makes me feel like a bad person coming here to address what I came here to address, and I really feel sorry for the whole city of Santa Rosa and the stress that we have lived through. I'm one of the people that was fortunate enough to have a house, and I really feel sorry for all the people that are suffering here, including yourselves, trying to deal with between executive and our human side. I think there's a way to maybe merge the two together. That's just my opinion. What I came here to address today is after the fires, after booking a trip to Mexico City to help some family after the earthquake, I used all my money for that. And then when the fires came, I was laid off for about a month. Right before that, I had gotten a ticket, which was very unfortunate. It was my fault, and I was blocking the access for the handicap on the street, more like a ramp from the street to the sidewalk. And I made everything possible to try and address it with the employees of the city to find a way to pay it. And nobody was able to tell me how to go about it. I said, hey, I'm in a tight situation. I've been donating money. I've been helping people out. And I'm just in a tight spot. I haven't been working for a month. How do I go about paying this in payments? No one could tell me. So I went ahead and took some time. I wrote to TurboTax, not TurboTax, the agency Turbo Systems that handles the payments for the city. And they weren't able to tell me either. They sent me the wrong form. I went and spoke to the gentleman in charge of parking, and he said, well, it's too late. Your registration is about to expire, so you're out of luck. So I said, hey, we just went through a tragedy here. We're all hurting. Where's the human side in this? And he said, it's not my problem. So, and I understand it was my fault solely, and I feel bad for it. But I want to know that there's a way that between the city and the agency that collects the money for the city to find a way to direct people the right way on how to pay a fine where they don't get hurt with penalties after they try and try and try. Before it became delinquent, I decided to make a payment by phone, and the system didn't register it. My bank account did register it, but it was been shown as holding in my bank account, so I wasn't sure if the money was going towards them or if the money was still in our bank account. So I waited till the New Year. After the New Year, it was Friday the 29th. It was before it went delinquent. So I waited till after the New Year to call back the city gentleman. I forget his name is Kevin, I believe, and nothing was ever done. Just want to find a way that we can find ways to make things during the tough times a little more efficient.
Thank you, Mr. Oliver.
Thank you.
Danielle Kagan, followed by Elizabeth Nealon.
Good evening. My name is Danielle Kagan, and I'm here tonight to represent CSAA Insurance Group, also known as AAA Insurance. You may recall that I came before you about 3 months ago, and I'm here today just to provide an update on our efforts to support the recovery. We had approximately 3,200 homeowner claims. Of those, 2,000 are already successfully closed. Those that are remaining includes those that have lost everything, and that will be a long process as they work to rebuild, and we are committed to being there and working with them, standing side by side throughout that process. Each one has been assigned a claims representative, and we're in the process of sending out an email now with a list of names to escalate if they are unhappy with their claims representative for any reason, and with an expectation that they would get a response within a day. In terms of automobiles, about 1,000 insurance claims were also filed, and most of those are resolved as well. The top issues that we're hearing about are coverages and inventory, and I'll share that we have a very generous coverage for our insureds. Of the coverage A, dwelling coverage to rebuild, we have an additional 50% on top of that, which factors into, takes into account the surge pricing and things like that, code upgrades, so that would hopefully enable people to be able to rebuild. Inventory, we had a vendor work with survivors, talking in broad categories. We weren't getting into details about pens and pieces of paper or anything like that. We're here to help, and we really want to help support them. Moving forward, we are here to support AAA policyholders and the community, and we welcome your input and feedback. If you hear about our service in the community or have any concerns, I'll email you with my contact information, and we would want to hear about that as well as any way that we can support the community moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kagan. Elizabeth Nealon, followed by Steve Bertelbaugh.
Hello there, and my thoughts may be a little scattered. I guess because of the fires I went through, hearing loss, and it has affected my brain. Although I have 4 brains in my head, generally it's affected my brains. Anyway, I love to listen to Berkeley radio. I have a homeless son. He was attacked by the Santa Rosa PD during a medical emergency 3 years ago, February the 7th. And he lives in a homeless encampment in Berkeley. And I'm so glad, they didn't kill him. And I've never been able to get the names of the officers that actually perpetrated this racist crime on behalf of the city of Santa Rosa. But I love to listen to Berkeley radio while I travel to Berkeley and back, because I don't really get it that well when I'm in Santa Rosa. So I'm just going to generally go over some stuff, but before I say anything about that, I just want to say that the condition of the transit mall needs to be monitored. There's a particularly crummy corner right by that cafe at this end. There can be 100 cigarette butts there sometime. I don't know what the policy and when they clean it, but it can be pretty grotesque over there. I don't think all the phone booths have been repaired yet. But anyway, some of the stuff I hear about on Berkeley radio is like Roundup, pesticides in our food. Yeah. Losing 200 species every so often, like every couple of days. Different species are becoming extinct because of our overdevelopment and greed of corporations. I heard Mamia Abu Jamal speaking from the prison system tonight as I was coming back from Petaluma right before I got here, and he calls it Prison Nation. And I think that's like sadly true. I heard this week that we are creating 2 or 3 new billionaires per week for the last year with the way we're spending our money, and basically that 80% of the profits go to 1% of the people. So that's kind of what's on my mind. I clean up a lot of garbage. I just have a feeling for it. I specialize in disposable silverware and straws, but especially I like to clean up bus stops and the transit mall, and they've been letting the homeless sleep there. I don't mind that, but they're not always the neatest people, and sometimes there's some real critical cleanup that needs to be done. People are taking Greyhound and stopping there, and they get an impression of what our city's about when they see the transit mall a mess. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Ms. Nalen. Steve Bertelbaum, followed by Bob Hanson.
Thank you, Mayor Corsi and members. Steve Bertelbaum. You have heard me talk a little bit before about the idea that in the 2 or 3 years, or maybe 6, that it's going to take for people to actually find their way back into permanent housing, we ought to have some temporary housing. And I wanted to give you a little bit of an update on this, triggered by an article that appeared this morning about people who are finding their way into campsites as their housing for temporary purposes. That's really less satisfactory than I'd like to see for folks. And I'll just tell you a little story that I picked up in the course of our research around this. Most campers are built to be occupied maybe 3 weeks at a time, maybe 3 or 4 times during the year. When you look at the toggle on the toilet, it'll work for perhaps 100 or so operations. But in the average family, we're going to have 300, 600, 900 a year. So people find that these temporary accommodations really don't work very well. What we're talking about is the conversion of shipping containers into apartments that can be up to 850 square feet. pretty good accommodations for families. Because you can compress the time that you actually deliver these, you can actually get them on site within 90 to 100 and 180 days from the time that you figure out where you want to have them. The big problem is that they have a 40-year lifespan, so they can serve perhaps 3 emergency situations. But you've got to figure out a way to fund these, because in one place you're only going to have them for maybe 3 to 6 years. So we're working on that. You're probably going to see an ordinance on this originally we thought February, probably in March. But I'd like you to keep your ears peeled about this situation, because we really need to do better for folks. You see that FEMA only has seen a little more than 100 applications for temporary housing. Well, I think the reason for that is because most of us don't think of going to FEMA for emergency housing. We go to a realtor. We go down the street and look for what's for rent. My guess is that of the 300 houses, or the 3,000 houses we've lost in the city, probably we need to duplicate about half of them. This can do it.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Bob Hanson.
Gentlemen, as a registered voter and proud citizen of Santa Rosa, I want our public media project brought back under public control. The argument in City Council to defend our public media project presented by Mr. McHenry, a presentation nobody in the audience could understand a word the man said, not a word, where our interim city attorney refused to answer questions from 3 of our city council members. We next saw Mr. McHenry presenting the Verizon contract for approval. Cell phone, cell tower placement and transmission within city propers has been deemed by the majority of the world's scientific and medical communities as a global medical crisis. Let me repeat that, a global medical crisis. If Mr. McHenry wasn't aware of this, he should have been. And if he was aware of it, then the health of the citizens of Santa Rosa was not his concern. We next saw the man in front of the city council, last agenda on the night. I was the only person left in the audience. Our city council established a new job title, head of technology, and gives this man $145,000 a year base pay. When a government is promoting policies not to the benefit of the public, the first thing they do is eliminate information to the public. And that's what was done with our city public media. It was my understanding when the Verizon contract was presented that it was rejected by our city council. These transmitters placed on our public utility poles 30 feet above the heads of our public was rejected. That the Verizon tower on the other side of 101 was not allowed transmission. Now all of a sudden we find out they're putting transmitters. I want assurances from my city council that this Verizon transmitter is not transmitting. I want assurances from my city council that this Verizon contract was not approved. Because the last time I walked out of city council meetings, the Verizon contract was rejected. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hanson. Move on to item 14.1.
Item 14.1, report district-based city council elections, composition of districts, rescheduling of public hearings, California Voting Rights Act, Sue Gallagher, city attorney, reporting.
Good evening. As you know, back last fall, we had begun a process to transition the city from at-large council member elections to district elections. And we're here tonight to consider restarting that process. As you know, the city currently elects its city council members through an at-large voting system. By way, all voters in the city cast their ballots, and the candidates that receive the highest votes are given a 4-year term on the city council. Last July, we did receive a legal challenge to that system, a certified letter from the law firm of Schenkman and Hughes. That letter, that challenge alleged that the at-large voting system violates the California Voting Rights Act. The letter alleged that the city has racially polarized voting, and that racially polarized voting has combined with the at-large election system to impair the ability of Latinos to elect candidates of their choice or to influence the outcome of elections. The letter threatened litigation if the city did not voluntarily transition to district-based election system. So on August 29th, the council considered that letter and in the end adopted a resolution stating its intent to transition the city to district-based election system. That decision was based upon a couple of factors. One is that the preliminary investigation and review of our past elections did indicate that the city may have racially polarized voting. Racially polarized voting means when, in this case, because the letter focused on Latino voters, the idea is that the Latino population of our city tends to vote differently than the non-Latino population of our city. That preliminary indication that there is indeed a racially polarized voting, combined with the risks of litigating the letter, litigating the potential claim, if the city were to fight the demand for district-based elections, if we were to lose that litigation, we could face a court-ordered district election system whereby the court could set the boundaries of the district and set the sequence of elections, taking it out of the control of our local government, and also the risk of attorney's fees. These claims have been made across the state to many local jurisdictions, cities, school districts, and other local entities, and those that have litigated have, in general, faced very large attorney's fees claims ranging from around $1 million up to, in one case, I think it was $7.5 million in attorney's fees. So the council decided, based on the evidence that was before it, to adopt the resolution of intent to go ahead and transition the city, to start taking the steps to transition the city to district-based election system. There is a safe harbor provision in the elections code which provides that if the local entity meets certain timeframes in transitioning its election system, attorney's fees will be capped at $30,000 at the cost of, I should say, capped to the cost of the demand letter, not to exceed $30,000. So the council did direct staff to proceed with proposed transition of this election system under those safe harbor provisions. So under the safe harbor provisions, that code section gives the council 45 days from the date of receipt of the claim to adopt a resolution stating its intent to transition to district elections. Council did that by way of its adoption of the resolution on August 29th. safe harbor provisions then give a 90-day window in which the council must hold 5 public hearings. And if the council, after those 5 public hearings, indeed adopts an ordinance establishing district elections, then the city remains within the safe harbor and is protected against further litigation. The resolution intent included a schedule for those public hearings. The first schedule was to start on first public hearing was to be held on October 3rd, and the final public hearing and possible adoption of an ordinance was scheduled for November 21st of last year. That schedule met the requirements of safe harbor provision, and we started that process. So in accordance with the schedule, we did hold the first public hearing on October 3rd. But as you know, less than a week later, wildfires came into the city, and really all bets were off at that point. All of the city resources were immediately redirected to response to the fire, to the emergency response, and then as the weeks went by, into a broader response as well. The fires displaced, to begin with, really tens of thousands of households were evacuated, and those that occurred over the course of a week or two. And in the end, more than 3,000 of our housing units were destroyed. So in light of the devastation that we faced, we did suspend all of the proceedings under the Elections Code. But we're here tonight because there has been indications of potential interest in restarting the process to transition to district elections. We do propose that we start the process entirely anew. We did, as I mentioned, hold the first public hearing back in on October 3rd. But in order to have full transparency, full community participation, we do recommend that we just start the process over again and go forward with all 5 public hearings. The schedule that we're proposing tonight, by statute, 2 of the public hearings must take place before any maps are drafted. We propose that those 2 public hearings take place on February 6th and then February 13th. Those public hearings give the community an opportunity to talk about the criteria that should be used for drawing the district boundaries. Once those 2 hearings have been held, then we can put our consultants to work to draft proposed district maps and to develop a proposed sequence of elections. And once those are posted and published, we have 2 additional public hearings to review the maps and the election sequence. And we're proposing that those hearings be held on March 13th and April 3rd. We do anticipate under the schedule that a proposed ordinance would be introduced at the April 3rd meeting. We would then have a final and fifth and final public hearing on April 10th prior to the adoption of an ordinance. If all of the maps before adoption, the map must be posted for at least 7 days. So if there are any revisions to maps in those last 3 hearings, things might get bumped a week, but we did try to allow for time for map posting. I do want to say there are, in this process, we do recognize that the impacts of the fires have added some rather substantial complications to this process. First of all, we still do have our 3,000 households that have been displaced. Many of those households still have found alternative housing within the city of Santa Rosa or in nearby communities, but many have have moved out of the area, maybe out of the county, in other areas of the state, or even outside the state. So we do have residents that it's going to be very difficult for them to participate in this process. We also recognize that for those households, they're facing a rather daunting task, potentially, of rebuilding and rebuilding their lives, rebuilding their homes, and it may not be the ideal time for this process to occur for those households. We do, though, intend to do as much outreach as we can and to encourage participation. The other complication with that displacement of the 3,000 homes is it could potentially affect how the demographer looks at our population, and in trying to get equal numbers of folks in each district, and also appropriate communities of interest may be complicated by some of the unknowns of what's going to happen in those areas. We are recommending that the demographer proceed, assuming full rebuild of those areas, and to include, assume that will be repopulated and reinvigorated as quickly as we can. The other complication that this adds to is, as you know and as you heard over the last week in our meetings, we have very severe budget constraints at this point. When we were looking at this in the fall, our schedule included a number of community meetings on different days, different times, different locations. We will have to wait and see, in large part based upon your direction on Thursday in terms of priorities, of how robust of a process we will have outside of the 5 public hearings that take place in this chamber. That we will have to evaluate. Our community engagement office is very thinly staffed, as you know, and that's one of the things that the council will have to consider on Thursday and moving forward, is where are those resources best directed. So with that, we recommend that the City Council establish a renewed schedule for public hearings regarding the composition of new voting districts and the establishment of district-based council elections. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Gallagher. Questions? Mr. Oliveris?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Sue, for addressing the complications with people who have been displaced because of the fires. And I would ask, that is a concern of mine, that we do everything we can to provide them information wherever they may be, and trying to find some creative resources to make that happen. And encouraging them to sign up for some of our notices online, all the things that we have, giving them everything we can. Perhaps we can solicit assistance from others that are also working with the fires. AAA was here today, still is here today as well. Perhaps we can ask them to send out notices to those that are probably waiting outside the state or someplace else until their home is rebuilt, to just send them information that this is happening and here's how you can get information. But just be creative as to how we can make that happen.
Yes, certainly. We will use all avenues that we can think of to do outreach, and also all avenues that we can think of to enable participation from distance.
Mr. Schwedel.
Thank you. And I would just add, if we can remember FEMA also, we have 16,000 folks that have registered with FEMA, and I know the VOAD will be using that as a database to look at some gap analysis. So again, I think that would be a great starting point to actually have the names of some folks who may have been displaced. Can you share with me after, well, first of all, are the same demographer and the law firm, are they still available to do it? Because I know we're not the only community that was going through this.
Yes, we're still working with the same attorney and the same demographer.
Great. And then what impact, because I understand there'll be another census taken in 2020.
Yes.
So as we're talking about, what will Santa Rosa look like in 2020, what impact will that have on whatever districts we come up with in 2018?
Whatever districts that we establish in 2018 will be looked at again and reevaluated after the 2020 census.
And so that would be another thing that would come back to the city council, and I don't know if it would be, do you know, would it be in 2020 or would it be 2021? What is the timeline?
I don't know the timing. The census is conducted in 2020, but I frankly don't know when the data all comes out and is available.
And some of the budgetary challenges, do you know, we readjust the districts, let's say we have the 2020 census, general fund have to pay for whatever new consultants to come in and to redraw those? Do you know how that process would work?
I presume that it would be general fund money. I don't know any other funding resource to pay for that adjustment.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Rogers.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think what Councilmember Schwedhelm is getting at is one of the key questions that I have, which is that there's broader process questions that we need to answer as well. For example, I think what he's really hinting at is how are we going to not just move into maps, which we have to do at a much more expedient timeline, but how are we going to create a process for this community in perpetuity for creating the maps as the new census happens. So, for example, the state does an independent redistricting commission that has timelines that are laid out. The city should be looking at doing something similar as well in the future. My understanding is that the census data from 2001 has been updated every couple of years through statistical analysis, and that these demographers would be using 2016 data as the most complete data set, the most recent data set, and that is not going to be that far from what we expect to see in 2020. So I think that that's kind of where Councilmember Schwedhelm was going, and one of the questions I had. There are additional charter changes that we might like to see. We've talked a little bit about the potential for, in the future, doing an at-large mayor. I'd like to know, within the constraints of the city, and maybe this is for goal setting to discuss as well, when and if we can have those conversations about other changes that we need to accompany districts as well. And then I think the last process question that I have is I think it's really important for this council to determine how we are going to determine which district is up in 2018 and 2020 prior to the districts actually being drawn. In the spirit of equality and equity in this process, instead of having the maps drawn and then picking and choosing which ones will be up, I think we need to be transparent with the public prior to the maps being in place, how that process will play out. Looking at the calendar, I just want to make sure I understand. If the ordinance is introduced April 3rd, barring any hiccups, the final adoption of maps should take place on April 17th. Is that correct?
So I think, again, we're setting the timetable here, and I'm already noticing there's a date that may be problematic here. I think you all need to set a general agreement on the timetable. If there are things that you want to add as we get into sort of the mandate conversation, obviously if this goes through tonight, there's a mandate to get this work done. We need to sort of look at that with other mandates, because this timetable is concurrent with submission of the project worksheet to FEMA. So just want to make sure that that's really clear, and the initiation of the budget process. So we're trying to balance all those things. So understanding this is the timetable, if the need is to address some of these additional issues, that's what tonight is to begin the work on, so that we can make sure that we have enough time in the overall schedule to meet all these goals. So again, the idea, if you're looking for some of the assurities that you want, this becomes the input process, so we can finalize this schedule. Again, we're proposing a schedule. We want to meet in this sort of period of time. That's staff's intent, but we need to have some of this feedback to tweak it.
Yeah, so I'm asking more of a general question than the exact specifics. If I understood correctly, you said 2 weeks from the ordinance introduction is what we are required to have before they can go into place, if I understood correctly.
No, it's 1 week. We can adopt the ordinance 1 week after its introduction, unless in introducing the ordinance, we've made any map changes. It becomes difficult because those map changes have to be posted for a full week before its adoption. So given that we meet in the evenings, it may be difficult to do that. We may push out the adoption for a second week. So that's some flexibility. And if I may address two of the other points quickly. First, yes, when we addressed this last fall, there were issues raised about other potential adjustments to the way the council is constituted. Those are not at issue in this process. This process is only for the transition from at-large to district-based elections. It would not change how the mayor is elected or other factors.
No, absolutely.
So, right, that'll be a separate process. And then in terms of the sequencing of elections, that is part of also what our demographer will work on, so that what will come and be presented after those first two public hearings and before the third will be both a proposed district map and a proposed sequence of elections for those districts. And then as you go through the public hearings and your own deliberations, both of those can be adjusted as you go through that process.
No, I appreciate that. I think that the question of which district is up is a far more political question than what the maps look like. And so I want to make sure that we're as transparent as possible in that process from the get-go.
Certainly.
And I absolutely, the idea of an independent commission or charter changes, I understand that those can wait when we're not in crisis mode implementing these first maps. I'll be interested in having them in place prior to 2021 when we get the new census data at that point, but not urgent. I just wanted to make sure that it doesn't get lost in the conversation.
Certainly, and we also have a process and a schedule for charter review in general.
Right. Then as far as the public outreach goes, I understand that Kahlua, you guys are really stretched thin. I get that. At goal setting last week, I had mentioned that there are areas where I feel like we as council members can step up a little bit more. I already do community office hours, try to do them monthly. Obviously, it's fallen off in the fire. I don't think it would also be a problem for council members to step up in that role and go out and get community input and bring it back to the deliberations if it helps staff not feel so strained.
Well, I think that's one of the critical spaces. We can get into that conversation on Thursday, but right now we're being torn between, sort of this resilient cities, resilient neighborhoods conversation and this particular conversation. And again, if this is a role council would like to play in sort of moving this particular forward, I think it would provide capacity for the community engagement team to focus on the resilient communities. But again, I would turn that back to the Thursday conversation.
Great, thank you.
I'd just like to reiterate what Mr. Rogers said about the sequencing of deciding on the sequence of the districts prior to creating a map of the districts. I think that the more we can do that in a blind way, before we know what the districts look like, where the districts are, the better it is for all of us to not be deciding what 3 districts are going to be up in November before we know who's going to be in those districts. So if we can get that sequence ahead of the mapping, I would really recommend that we do that.
Sure, and if I understand, it would really be the criteria for the sequence of elections that would be decided in advance of the drawing of the districts.
Yes. Okay. A couple of quick changes or questions. The demographer, I imagine they use different databases, but one of the databases that they use, I'm assuming, is the Registrar of Voters, where people are registered, at what address people are registered.
Yes.
And people who have been burned out of their homes can still use that address as their voting address. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. I think that that's something that we need to let people know if they are interested in taking part in districts where their house is or where their house isn't, that they can do that. I'll save comments for after public input here. Have a couple of cards. Dwayne DeWitt to start, and he'll be followed by Ron Taylor.
I'll speak from up here, sir. Hello, my name is Dwayne DeWitt, and I'm very glad that you're taking this action tonight. And I wanted to compliment Mr. Corsi on the comments that he has just made, as well as Mr. Rogers. All of you are paying attention to an issue that is very important, and it's quite dear to the heart for many people who live in the Roseland area. As you know, you just had 7,000 more residents come into the city in Roseland, but for 20 some odd years before that, you had another 6,000 to 7,000 Roseland residents over there, and they always had difficulty in trying to find an ear here at the council, if you will. So I am hopeful you'll move forward as expeditiously as possible, and that you'll do, as Mr. Kersey and others have spoken about, try to make this as open and blind as possible at the same time. You understand what I'm saying there. I understand that in any political process, people will jockey to keep their power and to try to have the status quo the way it's been. This is an excellent opportunity, though, for all of you to work together for the betterment of the city, to have the districts the way it comes forward. Last but not least, though, it's very important that you understand demographers and demography sometimes may miss the nuance of a community and cultural anthropology, the people who live in a certain area and feel a certain way. And it's important that I state here that you please keep the people of Roseland together in one district and not try to split it down the middle and dilute their votes. After all this time, and they're finally getting a chance to basically be a part of the process, let them have an equality, if you will. And I would say the same thing for the people of Fountain Grove or the people of Proctor Terrace or the people in different areas. You find that geographic community and find your numbers. In this case, we could use, say, 75,000 registered voters, and you say, okay, we want to have 15,000 or 12,000 per district, etc. So please be very conscious of that. Thank you very much for your efforts. This is going to be a good thing, and I really appreciate the fact that you're doing it. I wish you all the best in the new year, and I'll leave you with one last thing. Have a good new year.
Ron Taylor.
Am I on? Yes, my name is Ron Taylor, and I'm a member of the political organizing committee of the Sonoma County Democratic Party and a concerned citizen on this topic. We're very glad that you're going forward, that you're restarting the process. We would like to be helpful in promoting voter awareness and voter participation. We also ask that you maximize transparency. I think some of you have spoken to that already. We really want that to happen. For example, who will in fact draft the proposed maps? A demographer has been mentioned, an attorney. If they're the drafters, I'm hoping the information about who they are has already been posted. If not, it should be. That much more about the process so that the public can understand it. I think you probably are aware that several weeks ago the Press Democrat published an editorial advocating that a map developed apparently by the Chamber be adopted so as to expedite the process, and that it would not displace incumbents. And in my view, and I think the view of many, many people, incumbency should not be a consideration at all. Equity under the Voting Rights Act should be the lead consideration, and the Act spells out how that's to be approached. And I'm sure the consultants you've got are well aware of how to approach that. We really encourage following that kind of advice and keeping, incumbency considerations at a minimum. So thank you. Wish you the best in this.
Thank you. That's all the cards I have. Mr. Oliveros.
Yes, I wanted to follow up on the outreach. Will we have a point of contact here at the city if somebody were to ask us where can I get information or?
Yes, we will have a point of contact, and in the fall we had set up a link on the city website. We'll do this. We'll do that.
So we'll have it put up.
Yes.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I did have one more card here. Steve Birdlow. Better late than never.
Better late than never. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members. There is one legal question that I'd like to see cleared up before we get to the hearings, and that is in the description of the requirements, it is that all districts be of equal size. If that is read to mean that each of the 7 districts needs to be of equal size, that would preclude the idea of next November dividing the city into 3 districts, and you elect from those 3 districts, and then in 2020 dividing the city into 4 districts and electing members from those 4 districts. Now, the advantage of that is that every person is represented by 2 city council members, and you avoid the problem of each individual district becoming a fiefdom in which anything that happens in that district needs to be cleared through that particular council member. And I think that's a bad situation. If you have every person in the city represented by 2 council members, you have a much more yeasty situation and a better chance for people to resonate with one of those council members. So I'd like to have that cleared up. I think that the law ought to be read in such a way that you can elect from 3 districts in one cycle and from 4 districts in the next cycle, so that everyone in the city is represented by at least 2 council members. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm sure we'll get that question and others answered by the time we get started on this process. It does bring up another question from me, though, that there are several maps that have been submitted by the public on our website. One of them, Mr. Bertelbaugh just referred to. How will those be used as we start this process?
We will include any of the comments and maps that we receive before. We will include in the public comment for this time around as well.
And there's still time for people to submit additional maps and additional comments?
Yes, we will have a system for folks to weigh in on potential maps, to propose their own maps. And again, the first hearing will be on February 6th. And particularly, actually throughout the whole process, people can weigh in and propose alternative maps or propose revisions to the maps that the demographers present.
And we had talked at one point about a website that was interactive where you could move the lines around and see what happens to the districts as far as population and other data. Is that website, what's the status of that?
We're still working on that.
Okay. So will that be linked to the website that we have that exists right now?
We are hoping so, but we don't have any assurance at this point that that will be up and running.
Okay.
But we are working on it, and obviously that would be the ideal if we can have that
All right.
active. So.
And for the public's knowledge now, what is the website where comments and your own individual maps can be? I think it may be something like SR City/district elections. Is that right?
Close. It's srcity.org/district elections with an S at the end.
Thank you. srcity.org/district elections. Thanks. Other questions? Yes.
Not so much a question, just sort of also a clarification, because I realize I didn't explicitly state it. Part of why I want us to have that conversation about which district is up when is I think people need to also pay attention to the fact that we're going to be locking specific districts into the lower turnout gubernatorial elections and other districts into the higher turnout presidential elections, which will have extremely broad implications for the city as well. And I'm not sure that we've had that laid out or part of the discussion up to this point, and wanted to make sure that we had that as well.
Yes, we are very sensitive to that issue, and that will be included in the discussions. That issue will be included in the discussions.
Any final comments? I just want to acknowledge that the circumstances of the city have changed since last August, obviously, but the circumstances of the law have not, and we're still facing a difference between being able to cap our costs here at $30,000 or potentially risking up to $1 million. So for me, the decision is easy to make, that it's the same as the decision we made in August. And I did want to just weigh in that I think that for now, as far as the public hearing process, we need to do what's required. I don't feel like we need to put the extra burden on the community engagement department at this time. The resilient neighborhoods effort, I think, is something that we really need. And if the council can help here, I'm certainly willing, as others have said, to help with that. Thank you very much.
We'll need a motion, and
I'm sorry.
Sure. And if I may, I would like to ask that the motion be that the City Council establishes a renewed schedule for public hearings regarding the composition of new voting districts and the establishment of district-based council elections, subject to the provisions of Resolution 2017-173, which gives...
Can the city attorney back confer for just a second?
We're all good.
Hey, and I'm sorry to do this, but would you repeat?
Sure, I'll repeat that, and I'll also explain what I'm doing. Maybe I should explain what I'm doing first. That will help lay the groundwork. What I want to do is to make it clear that this is providing a new schedule, but is still subject to the same terms as the resolution of intent that the council adopted last August. And in particular, that resolution, among other things, makes it clear that it's a tentative timeline and gives the city manager the authority to adjust that schedule as he deems necessary, appropriate, provided we still stay within that 90-day period. And that's to accommodate, of course, we'll have the goal-setting meeting on Thursday, so there may be some adjustments that come up at that time, and there may be some scheduling issues as we go forward. So I just wanted to make sure we have This is the tentative timeline. If we have changes, obviously we'll make those very, very public and announced, but we do want to include some flexibility tonight going forward.
So specifically, it's about a date layout. I think the time frame is what we're still looking for, this general time frame. We may need to do some tweaking because, as I said, there's a series of mandates that we're managing, and we want to make sure that we hit all those mandates. And was enough time to have a conversation. In additional, I think we need to create some room to have the sequencing conversation, and so we just want to make sure we meet all of those within the general time frame. What that's saying is that we may have to switch a specific date here and there.
I think prudence is a good thing because unexpected things do happen.
Yes. So again, the motion would be that the City Council establish a renewed schedule for public hearings regarding the composition of new voting districts and the establishment of district-based council elections, subject to the provisions of Resolution 2017-173.
So moved.
Second. Any votes? That passes with 5 ayes. Council members Tibbetson and Combs absent. Thank you. We have no public hearings. We have no written communications. I have no cards. And we are adjourned.
Santa Rosa, out there in the middle of everything.
Over 90 miles of creeks run through Santa Rosa. Runoff from